While we're waiting, we'll go over the agenda. Our goal, we have 3 panels today, each roughly 20 to 35 minutes. I'm going to be a stickler on time simply because I have a commitment back in district as does other members here. Whether or not it goes beyond that will be up to my co-chairwoman here. In order to hear additional comments, we have a strict agenda that we have already notified people who will be speaking. And so hopefully by the time you'll come up, you'll be here and ready to present. And with that, sorry, I didn't mean to make you rush there, buddy. Clerk, please call the roll.
Bertino Tarrant. Belt. Aquino. Bush. Gillespie. Glowiak Hilton. Kohler. Lightford. Manar. Martinez. Villavalam. Weaver. Barrickman. Karan. DeWitt. Fowler. And Resin.
Okay, the Joint Senate Education and House Elementary Secondary Education School Curriculum and Policies Committee shall come to order. I do have 2 letters of replacement. The first, replacing permanent member Representative Mason with temporary member Representative Scherer, and the second, replacing permanent member Representative Stewart with temporary member Representative Carroll. Clerk, if you could call the roll.
Mussman.
Here.
Crespo.
Present.
Bourne. Bennett. Conroy. Costa Howard. Edley Allen. Gone Gershowitz.
Present.
Harper. LaPointe. Mason, Shear. All right. McCombie. Meyer. Miller. Reich. Severin. Stava Murray. Carroll. Swanson.
Present.
Villa. Willis. Bennett. There. Here. All right.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to begin with some opening remarks. Chairwoman Mussman, do you have any opening remarks?
No, we have a lot of panels to get to, so I want to move as quickly to them as possible. But I do want to say I appreciate that so many people have taken the time to be in the room today to discuss this serious issue. We want to make sure that we're doing everything within our power to protect and to support the students that are within our care, and we want to make sure that our rules reflect the best possible policy for that. So thank everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, Senator Gillespie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to thank all the panelists for taking the time to speak with us today, as well as all of you in attendance for showing your support and advocacy today. Thank you. The ProPublica Chicago Tribune articles have revealed the use of isolated seclusion rooms in public and private schools and highlighted incidents of abuse and uses of those rooms for punishment for reasons that violate both law and ISB internal rules. Some of the statistics in those articles included over 20,000 times in the 2017-18 academic year for using those rooms, and yet only 12,000 incidents were documented for reasons of seclusion. More than 1/3, according to the article, were for non-safety reasons. And some of the specifics in those articles were truly horrifying, and we need to, as Representative Mussman said, do what we can to protect students in their classrooms. We recognize, however, that specific students have a genuine need for seclusion rooms, whether it be sensory overload or because they pose a safety risk to themselves or others. In this hearing, what we intend to do is to hear from all of you about what is the appropriate use of those seclusion rooms, what is the extent of the alleged abuse, review data collection and reporting procedures, identify gaps in oversight, and hear student, parent, and education expert perspectives. And what we particularly need to hear from you is what resources are needed in schools to help avoid the use and abuse of these rooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gillespie. Representative Carroll.
Hello, thank everyone for being here today. I'm going to speak from a little bit of a different perspective than Senator Gillespie did. I'm going to speak as for many years of my life, being touched was very difficult for me. For many years of my life, being alone was very hard, and it took me a very long time to figure that out. And the reason why is because I was put in isolation timeout as a child. I was physically restrained as a child. So you have somebody sitting up here tonight who is someone who can speak from firsthand experience. I'm a special education teacher by trade. One of the reasons why I went into special education and continue to work with children with special needs is because of the treatment I received as a child, directly related to being put in isolation and being restrained. When I read the article in the paper, and it was great journalism and really woke us to a lot of issues, to me, it was horrifying that that practice still was going on. It was horrible that we treat children with special needs the same way we treat our most hardened criminals. And this is something that needs to stop now, and this is something that we have to stop both as a legislative body and as a state. So we're taking immediate action. To the children of the past, the kids that I grew up with, the ones that reached out to me that said to me, I appreciate you telling your story and talking about what we went through. We're going to stop this for future generations, and to the kids that are going through this now, it will not continue. You will not be punitively punished or restrained for the things that you do and the things that you cannot control. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I look forward to hearing from all the panelists, and we are going to get this right. And I will make sure that as long as I'm in the legislature, this will not continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I, too, want to thank everyone for being here today. We know this is an important issue. I acknowledge the Governor's Office and the State Board of Education for taking swift action to correct this horrible injustice to our students. And I, too, look forward to listening to our panels to find ways to, as we always try to do here, improve the situation and the learning experiences for our students. So with that, we are going to have our first panel. We're going to have Equip for Equality, Northwest Suburban Special Education Organization, Maria Robles, National Association of Social Workers, and the Illinois Association of Private Special Education Centers. I hope there's enough seats. We'll let you speak for, each get a minute, and then we'll open it up for questions from the legislators. Let's begin with Equip for Equality. Please state your name for the record.
Zena Nadich, I'm the president and CEO of Equip for Equality.
Deborah Kennedy, I'm one of the vice presidents, and I head up the Abuse Investigation Unit.
Welcome.
Good morning, chairpersons and committee members. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and thank you for including us to testify. For 35 years, Equip for Equality has served as the governor-designated federally mandated protection and advocacy system to safeguard the rights and safety of children and adults with disabilities throughout Illinois. The Chicago Tribune and ProPublica stories put a spotlight on the widespread punitive and abusive use of isolated timeout and physical restraints of children and youth by schools across Illinois. Use of these interventions cause emotional trauma and place both students and school personnel at risk of physical harm, as these are often violent interventions. Public schools and private therapeutic day and residential schools turn to these interventions as their go-to response to everyday and commonplace student misconduct in violation of the law. Even when safety concerns do arise, the schools have failed to employ earlier the kinds of interventions that can help de-escalate situations and prevent the need for the use of these dangerous interventions. And they often do not debrief afterwards to really look at what went wrong, what were the triggers for the student, and how can they prevent this from occurring again. In the absence of those two things, you will tend to see very high usage, which is the case here in Illinois. Illinois must strengthen student protections, empower parents, and expand student accountability. Otherwise, state oversight will be impossible, and students will continue to be at risk, and both the public and parents will remain in the dark. The heart-wrenching series not only permitted readers to witness the trauma experienced by students, but demonstrates that allowing schools to self-police themselves on these issues has led to the crisis we face today. Equip for Equality urges the legislature to codify key elements of the ISBE emergency rules and the proposed permanent rules into statutes so that over time, when the spotlight disappears, we don't have the school, the educators and ISBE in the future weakening those protections. This should be a very public process, and this is a decision, I think, that belongs with the legislature. We want to obviously see that the law prohibits the use of seclusion, or referred to commonly by schools as isolated timeout. For non-isolated timeout and restraints, there needs to be short time frames, and there needs to be an emergency standard applied. And this is the same standard that's used with adults with mental illness in the state, with Medicaid, Medicare facilities, which is essentially students or others are at imminent risk of serious physical harm. And we need to have parent notification enforced. We need to have schools retrained and regularly trained, again with an emphasis on de-escalation and debriefing. We think it's important the legislature direct the ISBE to take a leadership role on this issue, not just now, but into the future on an ongoing basis, to reduce and ultimately eliminate the use of violent interventions and provide ISBE and schools with the necessary resources. We think there needs to be a statewide resource for parents to turn to who know that these situations are being used, these interventions are being used on their students, so that they know what steps they can take, including either directly filing a complaint with ISBE, or or to file an anonymous report for the parents. Because one of the things we've seen over the years, our parents are terrified of raising these issues with the school or filing complaints because they basically are threatened that their student will be withdrawn from the school, and then what? So if they're in public schools, they're told you're going to end up in therapeutic day or residential, where it's used even more. So parents really feel like they have nothing they can do in these situations. We also think that it's important that there be independent monitoring of schools, targeting those with more serious compliance issues, include the failure of reporting and underreporting. As you saw in the story, right now there is a mandate that school report these incidents to the federal government, and huge numbers of schools are not reporting to the federal government. So you just need to recognize that when you adopt the standards you adopt, if you don't provide the oversight, the independent monitoring, and really watch over what the schools are doing, and if there's not some consequence to the schools, I think you're going to still have widespread noncompliance with the law. And we've seen that not only in the schools, but in other settings that use restraint and seclusion here in Illinois. So we commend the
We need
Pritzker
to wrap it up.
administration and ISBE, and we hope you'll take bold action today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Judy Hackett. I'm Superintendent of NSSEO. I want to thank you for this opportunity. Shall I start again? My name is Judy Hackett. I'm the superintendent of NSSEO. I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel and on this very important subject. I've had the honor of working in the field of special education my entire career, starting as a teacher of students with complex needs in the early 80s in Chicago Heights, and for the last 30 years in leadership roles in various districts and cooperatives in Northern Illinois. I also serve on several boards of state organizations and national organizations committed to public education, and I'm very proud of the work that we do on behalf of students. As superintendent of a large, progressive special education cooperative, I work every day with amazing students, families, staff, and leaders. I believe all of us are here today with the same compelling passion and interest in doing what's best for students. We also share a responsibility to foster and support safe learning and teaching environments in accordance with the law, in reflection of appropriate guidelines and best practices that we design and implement for schools and programs. It's important as we proceed in these hearings and discussions and rulemaking that we proceed with a balanced approach, an emphasis on best practices and training on de-escalation, a range of customized sensory supports, beginning with positive incentives for students and options that promote and cultivate positive rapport with our students. I have submitted written comments in the interest of time for this panel, but I'd like to summarize some of those considerations for this committee and for this state. To best address the issues that I have seen over a vast number of years in this field, please consider engaging in multi-level problem solving at the state and federal and local levels, focused on a range of intense student needs. Our students are coming to us with more and more complex mental health conditions and comorbidity, a number of different disabilities, and we need to be more sophisticated and thoughtful about our approach. While the current state rules are consistent with many other states, it is the guidance, the implementation, and the review that could be the focus of our future. I also believe it's important for us to develop a comprehensive shared understanding of the complexity of the issues and work towards what we can do together to address what schools, staff, parents, and students need within the legislative parameters and the guardrails and supports that would be effective to move forward. Develop those state guidelines and revisions that emphasize student and staff safety and advance our positive incentives and supports that enhance a positive learning environment. Increase our emphasis on best practices by well-trained professionals, including therapists, social workers, psychologists, teachers, coaches, BCBAs, and other associated resources for staff and for families that provide flexibility and latitude in crisis situations and enhance learning opportunities.
Need you to please wrap up.
With a state focus on RDA, a comprehensive results-driven approach through a task force of stakeholders with experience in programs and organizations. They could review state data and make decisions and recommendations on best practice. And finally, address the funding inequity for students with the most significant educational needs. 1% of our students across Illinois exhibiting the most intense disabilities are not included in the evidence-based formula. And in order to get the supports and resources that we need, this should be a legislative agenda as well. The question remains for us as we go forward, what are we willing to do to support families whose lives are often filled in crisis? Your efforts, reflections, and commitment to this important topic will help cultivate our next steps. I want to thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to add some people to the roll. We need to add Senator Glowiak, Senator Fowler, Senator Curran, and Senator Villavalon to the roll, please. And I'm sorry, Senator DeWitt. I'm sorry, I saw the back of your head there. Senator DeWitt.
Clerk, we would like to add Representative Sue Shear to the roll, please.
All right, panel. I think we gave you a good, clear guidelines before everyone's coming up. We want to be able to hear everyone within our short time span. I don't like to be mean up here, so please, I know we had said a minute. We know that's probably a little pushing it, but please stay. By 3 minutes, I'm going to have to cut you off. So thank you. We have a lot of speakers today.
Good morning, and I'll do my best to stay close to the minute time. I'm Tom Tebby. I'm the Executive Director for the Illinois Association of School Social Workers, and I'm here with our President, Maria Robles Sinkley. ISSW is an organization that represents 1,300 of the approximately 3,600 social workers across the state of Illinois. And school social workers are trained in behavior interventions, and as such, we feel like we're in a position to offer our expertise and practice wisdom as this legislation and rulemaking moves forward. And we've joined with Equip for Equality as an advocacy group to review the ISB rules and to offer our comments during the time frame that's specified. One of the primary issues I believe that needs to be looked at in both with this legislation and with rulemaking is the training of the staff who are working with these students. We believe that this training aspect is an essential piece. If the people who are working directly with these students don't have adequate training to work with de-escalation, to try and create a calm atmosphere, and to try and provide an environment in which students can have other avenues to deal with their behavior issues, I think that then the staff relies on these types of interventions that we don't see as appropriate are helpful to students and their particular growth. So I think the training of staff is really essential, and to have adequate staff in the buildings. If you have a social worker who comes into a building once a week or maybe once every other day, we need somebody who's present each day in these buildings where these programs are located to be able to provide support to students and to staff. I'm not sure what happened there during that time. The other issue that I think is important is accountability. How are these programs going to be held responsible for their actions as they work with students? There right now isn't a clear method for reporting this information, and then how the data is collected. So I think that's another avenue or a point that needs to be followed up as we continue to look at the rules and the legislation moving forward. And the final point I would like to make is that all of these students who are in these programs have individual education plans, and those particular plans should be driving the behavior intervention that happens with these students. And if that behavior intervention plan is not working, then there should be a convening of the staff who are working with these students, as well as the parents, to conduct another functional behavior assessment, and then to work toward developing a new behavior intervention plan if the current one is not working. I think it's essential that parents are involved in this process and that the IEP or the individual education plan be driving what occurs in the interactions with these students. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hillman.
Thank you. Kyle Hillman, Director of Legislative Affairs for the National Association of Social Workers. I just want to clarify that there's over 20,000 licensed social workers. 3,000 of those are school social workers. So just to be My association wanted to thank the joint committees for hosting this hearing, and we look forward to helping you stop this abusive practice. I just want to touch on a couple of quick points for time. To start with, there's no evidence that shows seclusion rooms are effective for disciplinary efforts nor for therapeutic interventions, like zero. It is therefore the position of NASW Illinois that Illinois should follow the lead of other states and ban this abusive practice. Even when physical harm is not apparent in the child, that child exposed to exclusion rooms and restraints remains severely traumatized and may experience PTSD, which often leads to suicide, depression, other adverse effects from that effect of a trauma. while we appreciate ISB's swift action, I think it's given us some time, everybody some time to evaluate this problem. I do want to state that the rules are not sufficient to actually address what's going on. Just having an individual in that room without tasking them to a therapeutic intervention is not effective in addressing these children's trauma. And in explosive children, it can actually create more trauma than it actually could actually create more trauma by having that individual not responding to that child while that person is in that room. And so we'd like to see some major changes to the ISB rules, but we frankly think that this body should just ban this practice altogether. To be quite honest with you, if a single mother, particularly of color, was locking their child into a closet, standing outside while the child is screaming, defecating itself repeatedly, this body would be asking for criminal charges. This is happening in our schools, and we're looking for ways to still make this possible for them to do it. It isn't enough to just put someone in a room to ignore an explosive child. These interventions have to be therapeutic. And while our institution is sympathetic to capacity crisis that we have in Illinois for certain children, we should never allow the abuse of children to occur because we lack capacity. It is on our job to build that capacity. These institutions need to hire at safe levels. They need to train their staff in non-restrictive interventions, and they need to change their disciplinary philosophy. Finally, we ask this body to review the staffing and oversight capabilities of ISB, as any new regulation will be just as ineffective as the previous regulations if they don't have the proper staff and oversight of these institutions. Quite a lot of what was reported in the news was actually against Illinois law. Even more was against ISB policy. So I question the effectiveness of additional rules without effective oversight. And so I think that needs to be the charge of this committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Silver.
Good morning. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak. I'm Sally Silver, the president of IAPSEC. The Illinois Association of Private Special Education Centers, IAPSEC, is horrified by the improper use of restraints and seclusion that have left students injured and harmed, as documented in recent news articles. As a not-for-profit organization of private therapeutic schools, IAPSEC is committed to exceptional care and treatment for those students with the most significant and severe needs in our state. Each of our schools has a specific mission, a set of belief and practices that are aligned with its mission and are approved by ISB on an annual basis. With over 50 agencies in our membership, we serve thousands of students in our state who, for example, have severe mental health needs, a history of significant aggressive behavior, severe autism, and other combinations of special needs and circumstances that require a highly individualized therapeutic placement. Most of our students have already experienced multiple placement failures, frequent hospitalizations, and have been referred to us by their school districts for their violent and aggressive behaviors. When the students enter our doors, they are often in crisis on day one, and their safety and the safety of others is of our utmost concern. Our specialized staff receives extensive training and has specific expertise that serves each student with dignity and respect, maintains the federal mandate of providing a free and appropriate education, reduces out-of-state placements, and keeps our students out of the judicial system. IAPSEC is here today to be a part of the discussions that we know we must have to protect all of the students in the state. We know that change is needed, and we want to be a part of that solution. We also know that the needs of the most severe students in our state need to be heard. IAPSEC believes that restraint and seclusion should only be used in situations that pose imminent danger. We believe that laws and regulations should reflect all types of needs in the state and should be flexible enough to address the most unique, severe situations by those who are the most highly trained to do so. We believe in a statewide system that includes strong monitoring, close oversight, continuous data analysis, and intensive training, including on trauma-informed practices on an ongoing basis. We believe that individualized crisis management plans should be developed that consider each child's unique situations, the triggers they suffer from, and the causes of that trauma that have tragically impacted their lives. As we review each proposed regulation and bill, we seek to better understand the best ways to move forward collectively. We encourage teams of stakeholders to review the research, the standards of care, and the data collected to comprehensively address this critical matter. As a part of that process, we do have some questions regarding Senate Bill 2315 and House Bill 3975, including what is the specific definition of an enclosed space as it relates to the statement students may not be confined to an enclosed space? Our schools generally provide separate space for students to receive services such as therapeutic counseling and may limit egress for safety purposes. Number two, our schools have many children with sensory needs that use sensory tools and access therapeutic space to support emotional regulation. Would this type of service to the student be no longer available to them? And three, what types of placements would not be included in the restrictions? We are seeking clarity in regards to how this would impact court-ordered placements in schools like ours that are funded by school districts,
Ms. Silver, we need you to wrap it up, please.
out-of-state placements that are subject to their own state laws, and schools that are subject to other rules, such as the Part 401 rules of the Illinois State Board of Education. Today, we have filed a witness slip of no position on the merits in the hope that we will be a part of a working stakeholder group to address the safety of students in the state of Illinois. We look forward to working together with you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, panels. We'll now open up to questions. Senator Gillespie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First, I want to talk about the issue of training. 3 quick questions for the panel. For those that are proposing increased training, I'm assuming we're not talking about training everybody in a school, but training those who would be involved in interventions with students or in direct contact with students. You wouldn't be training admins or things like that, but I just wanted to clarify who needs the training and what kind of training.
One of the things that really is important, especially in specialized programs, again, I represent cooperatives, that every staff member is trained on NVCI, nonviolent crisis intervention, or those kinds of trainings that's imperative for the kind of work that we do and the students that we serve. To a number of points from other panelists, the training also on behavior support plans, functional behavior analysis, best practices, and the kinds of things that are inherent in the work that we do every day with students. That means administrators, that means all of our parapros, our support staff, and for parents to have that training as well, so that they know in those situations in crisis when they're at home with their children. That too has been something that we have found particularly impactful, and we can work closely in terms of partnerships with families in that.
So everybody trained on de-escalation techniques?
Right, on NVCI.
But not on, and who would be trained on the appropriate use of rooms?
All of that would be a part of the training for everyone.
So anybody would be able to-
In our programs, yes, and,
Anybody would be able to put somebody in a room then?
right. Well, they would know the process for that. Mhm.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I
Oh, I'm
do,
sorry.
but I think he has another answer.
Yes,
Okay.
in addition to, sorry.
Dr. Happy?
What doctors already said, I think that having staff who are trained mental health professionals in the building is also very critical to help work with not only a consultation with staff, but also working directly with these students. And to have as I said earlier, to have that person present in the building to be able to provide those services when they're needed.
Okay. A quick question for you. You mentioned IEPs.
Yes.
There were some reported incidents in the articles of students that aren't on IEPs being placed in these rooms. Are you proposing that only students with an IEP ever be placed in those rooms, or something else?
It's difficult for me to understand how students would be in these programs and not have an individual education plan, because their behaviors would be such that it would have necessitated an IEP or an individual education plan be developed, and also that there be some kind of functional or behavior plan in place for them.
Okay, so that there should be an IEP. Okay,
And again, that IEP should be directing and guiding the behavior interventions that occur for that student.
We certainly agree that any school personnel who are in contact with children should be trained, but it should be more than just de-escalation. We should be looking at what are the child's triggers, what's underlying the behavior we're concerned about, because we know that behavior is communication. And in addition, what are the traumas the child has suffered, and how do we bring about very trauma-informed care so that staff understand what that means and how to engage with the child in that fashion.
Okay.
So if we start earlier, before we have to de-escalate a situation, we may never get to the point where staff are needing to de-escalate. We will intervene at a more appropriate time.
okay. And one last question, Mr. Hillman. You talked about banning the rooms completely, but then you also talked about therapeutic interventions. So are you opposing the use of removing a child from an overstimulated environment or classroom for therapeutic intervention, or what specifically?
So there's a significant difference between an exclusion intervention and a therapeutic intervention. So
Okay.
there are rooms that we fully support where kids are welcome to go to de-escalate, right? Where they can go to de-stress. There are processes by which using positive behavioral interventions, a mental health professional can work with that child to de-escalate, right? So we support those kind of removing that child from that population while they're going through crisis.
Okay.
That's very, very different than we're going to, for disciplinary purposes, because we don't have the proper staff or the proper training, put a child into an exclusion room to deal with a disciplinary problem. That we absolutely think needs to be completely banned.
Okay. So do you have an issue with the use of a separate room, or is it the kind of room?
It's the purpose.
addition
It's the
to- in addition
purpose,
to how
and
it's being
and
used,
it's the
right.
design. It's the design. It's the purpose. It's the complete. There's some schools that have very effective de-escalation rooms from a perspective of it's a comfortable room. It's a place where kids can go. They can get de-stressed. Some of the high schools in Chicago, for example, that frankly has banned this process, has these really effective rooms where kids are able to go, and there's a mental health professional that they can actually work with, or they can just go and listen to some music to de-escalate. Right. So we create some of those dramatic, non-violent interventions and create positive behaviors. We fully support those rooms.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing in this article, though, are padded rooms that lock. What we're seeing is new regulations that still allow for us to, for disciplinary purposes, put a kid into a room and just put somebody there to ignore them. That happens to have de-escalation training, but we don't have details of what is the therapeutic aspect of what are they in there for. So those are the things that when we talk about we want this practice banned, we want the practice of exclusion rooms banned. We fully support de-escalation rooms. We fully support de-stress rooms. We fully support actually hiring to safe levels so that these schools can actually approach these explosive children from a therapeutic perspective, not the disciplinary perspective.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, hang on. So, Representative Crespo, I believe you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank all of you for coming here today. I want to take a moment and thank the press. If it weren't because ProPublica in this report, we wouldn't be having this meeting today. We experienced the same thing with CPS and the sexual abuse scandal a year and a half ago. And we experienced the same thing with the CPS denying special education services in Chicago. So I'm glad you're not fake news. You do provide value, and thank God you guys did identify these issues. And listen, today we're gonna hear a lot about recommendations. We've heard some today. Put more dollars into the evidence-based model to help this population. We've heard about providing more training for these folks that deal with this population as well, and I appreciate that. I was chairman of this committee last session and for the last 6-8 years. And I remember when we had the special education subject matter hearing in this room, the State Board of Education appointed a monitor to have oversight over special education and CPS. We had a subject matter follow-up in the summer, and we found out that the monitor did not do they didn't do their job. Now, currently, according to the ProPublica article, here's some of the findings. Although state law requires schools to file a detailed report each time they use seclusion, no one is required to read these accounts. Parents often do not know the details of what happens in seclusion, though state law requires schools to notify families in writing within 24 hours each day a child is secluded. That doesn't always happen. And while some notices describe the incident, others are just form letters with just a checkbox to indicate that a child was secluded. We have requirements today. So you couple these requirements with what you're recommending, and they're just going to sit there. Finally, the report also states that the last time the United States Department of Education calculated state-level seclusions in 2013, 2014, Illinois ranked #1. You mean to tell me that we've known this for the last 4 or 5 years and we haven't done anything about this? So I think there's a bigger question here, and that is, where's the oversight, right? Who's going to make sure that they monitor what's going on and enforce this? And here's my question to Equip for Equality. In your opening statement, you had mentioned that you are actually you're here because you're federally mandated to, this is your statement, has the governor's designated federally mandated protection and advocacy system to safeguard the rights and safety of children and adults with disabilities for the state of Illinois. Do you have oversight over seclusion and restraints today?
We have federal authority, yes, to go into settings, including schools.
Do you have the capacity? Please explain to me why hasn't Equip for Equality, and maybe this doesn't fall under your purview, I don't know, just help me understand, help me reconcile this. So
Sure.
if I read your statement correctly, I would imagine that you would have oversight over this, and you should have been reporting this even before the press identified the issue.
In general, the role of the protection advocacy systems is typically to look at what the state's doing and try to ensure the state's doing their jobs. On this issue, over the years, in all sorts of settings, we've played a key role. In the article, there was a story about, reference to the student that was locked in Pontiac in a 3-by-3-foot box. That was a case where we provided legal representation. We've done reviews of private psychiatric hospitals' compliance with federal law and found widespread noncompliance. We've done reviews of the state-operated mental health and developmental centers' compliance on issues of restraint. And at the time we did the study, which was quite a few years ago, we found 100% noncompliance with the law. And then we've done work, other work on the school issue, representing parents. So we have a lot of and we've done a national death study that was actually directly funded to Equip for Equality by Congress, where we looked at deaths of children and adults, and among the findings was that prone and supine restraints were major causes of death. So it was our cases that resulted in legislation in the past and the adoption of what were the current rules until recently. Unfortunately, what happens, though, is when there's these exposés, and we worked on the 4-part series with Dave Savini years ago about isolated timeout, is there's a lot of attention, and then in the end, what's happened is last time was ISBE brought together key stakeholders, which is primarily the education associations. There were 3 advocate groups, including us, and so we were a minority vote on everything. So we end up with rules that really didn't reflect what we felt needed to happen. But back to the issue, as we started getting federal authority to be not just a legal advocate, but an independent watchdog, there was no increase in federal funding. And so part of what we did at the time is we actually became, Congress had us as a national demonstration project on abuse and neglect, and that included use of restraint and seclusion. But we look at it across all settings, these issues, not just schools. So we do have a special education rights clinic, so parents can call, but again, we have 7 lawyers that work for the clinic. We have a large number of volunteer lawyers. So there's things we can do, but it's always going to be limited scale without additional resources.
So
We don't have the capacity to go in and do this kind of in-depth study. We've even done evaluations of the performance in the past of the Inspector General at DHS, in the quality of their abuse neglect investigations. So we did that investigation with the support of the DHS director and the Inspector General, who agreed that our findings about problems with investigations in the past were accurate, and they supported the change. So we know how to do this, but no, we don't have the kind of resources to tackle school restraint and seclusion.
Do you have statutory authority to do this today?
Yes.
So it's just a matter of funding.
Yeah.
So if the funding was there, you could be the independent oversight entity to overlook at this operation through the entire state.
Yeah, I think you'd want the state board. I mean, the state board's collecting all this data. They're going to be doing a lot of analysis. So we would hope to partner with the state board, but we would like to be able to have the independent component. We think it strengthens the system, and it keeps an eye on what, attention on what it needs to be kept on.
Just for full disclosure, we did meet a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And I appreciate the fact that your staff took the time, and I firmly believe that, again, we're going to come up with some great recommendations. We have requirements today. They're not being enforced. That's a conversation we need to have. We failed as a state to take care of kids, not only at the schools. We've heard about DCFS. They have oversight, and they failed miserably as well. So I think your group does some great work, and hopefully we'll continue having this conversation.
Thank you.
Identifying the funding requirement to make sure you provide the oversight and the enforcement, make sure that these things don't happen again.
The other thing the committee should be aware of, this is an issue that there were congressional hearings on under the Obama administration. There was a meeting at the White House with the national educators and national advocacy groups that I was invited to. And in the end, and they looked, among other things, at school deaths from restraints. And no reform was passed because of the strong opposition, particularly from the therapeutic day and residential schools. So this is an area where reform has been extraordinarily difficult because of the deference to the school entities.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we're going to play good cop, bad cop. I'm going to be the bad cop to keep us all on time here. And I know we have 3 more questions from people, so we need to keep our answers succinct as possible, again, because before I leave, I would like to hear all the panels. After this, we can stick around. If the panels will stick around, anyone can ask questions. But we have 3 more people who want questions. All right, thank you.
All right, Representative Costa-Howard.
Thank you. So I would like to be clear about some of the definitions that we're using for these rooms, because words matter, definitions matter, and I know that that's a big concern. I heard people, I've heard isolation room, seclusion room, de-escalation room, timeout room, therapeutic room, and then I heard, but we're okay with some of these rooms. I just want to know what definitions we're good with for which types of therapy or de-escalation, whatever we're going to term it. I just need some definition and context around it because it's very confusing.
Sure. That's a great question and probably really hard to do in 3 minutes or less. It really
No, I didn't say 3 minutes. We got to go quicker than that.
Okay. Okay. I have already used up 30. It is more.
I guess here, I'll make it easier for you. Define the rooms that we are vehemently opposed to. We know using any type of isolation room for a disciplinary
Right.
process, we are vehemently opposed. Got
Correct,
that. So
correct.
what other room are we opposed to with the definition of why?
In terms of opposition, it is when we use a room, a timeout room, in an isolated, punitive, disciplinary process, and that is in our state law currently. If we use a said room or place, and we use it to de-escalate a student, if we use it in a proper sensory manner, then I think I heard our panel consensus that we are supportive of that, because it is a way for that student to with support from an adult, de-escalate, prepare themselves to re-enter that classroom. Is that helpful?
Representative Conroy?
Just briefly, Kyle, how many social workers did you say we have in schools?
So actually, Tom would be the expert on that one. But there's roughly about 3,000 school social workers, about 20,000 licensed social workers in the state, with that can, and this will be a bill for next year, but that can transfer over to schools with some bridge technology.
So currently, how many social workers do we have per student in the state of Illinois?
I don't know that number, do you? It's woefully under the ratio.
There have been numerous ratios in various publications. Some recommendations have been for one social worker for every 250 students.
That we're nowhere near that.
No, we're nowhere near that. Right now, there's approximately 3,700 social workers in the state of Illinois, and it depends on where you are in the state. There's some districts downstate that have no social workers at all in their high schools, sometimes in their whole district. I know in Decatur, they're looking for 10 social workers in their special ed co-op. So there's a definite need for more social workers, school-trained social workers across the state.
And what about mental health professionals, especially in therapeutic day schools? What's required there?
There isn't a hard, fast requirement. We just know from both, I could speak from probably public and private, that we know that there needs to be a lower intensity, a lower ratio. And so we make that determination based on our programming. We have several social workers and psychologists in our programs because in order for us to provide a therapeutic level of support, it requires a much more intense ratio of staff to students.
So are you saying that's an arbitrary, it's decided
I think it
per-
would be guidelines per se, and it really depends. We have several therapists in a program that has 100 students, so we would have several psychologists and social workers within that.
And is that required,
program.
or is that
It's by our program design, not required by the state.
something we need to talk about?
And our last question, Senator Resin.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Is it fair to say that if we have just better oversight and use the data that's been compiled, that we will have better outcomes? Is that fair to say, or are you saying in your suggestions that we need to completely overhaul and change the system? Because I've heard both today.
Look, I think if we had better oversight, I think we wouldn't see half of the things that happened. But if we're going to set real policy, I think we have to look at completely overhauling how we use these rooms, what these rooms are for, and who's going to monitor how they're actually doing them. And for us, our perspective is that you can't use exclusion rooms from a therapeutic perspective. They just can't. Not as they're being used, not as any way that can be used. However, there are different ways to do de-escalation. There's different ways to do positive behavioral interventions, and that's what we should be focusing on. That's what these schools should be focusing on. And if it's a situation where they can't operate unless they provide these dramatic and abusive interventions, then we should be looking at how do we replace and build that capacity in the state.
Yeah, I think we would say you have to have a culture shift in the schools, which is something that we've seen in other settings, where you really focus on trauma-informed interventions, and over time move towards reduction and then ultimately elimination of this. The fact that we're number one in use suggests we're just in from what you saw in the Tribune ProPublica series, we're schools have become very punitive in how they're dealing with students with disabilities. And this is their go-to methods for not doing homework, not putting your shirt tail in. I mean, you're just seeing very abusive use. So if you don't get some real shift, I think you're gonna, in how the schools think about this and approach it, I think it'll be hard just by changing the law, even with oversight, to get what you need. You're going to have to sort of transform schools. Individual schools should have plans. They should be analyzing this data. They should have a plan to reduce it and ultimately eliminate it. And that's stuff that I think won't happen unless, in fact, the state mandates it.
All right, thank you. And if you can, please stick around. I do know we have some other people who wanted questions, but I am being pretty much a stickler here. Please add Leader Lightford to the roll. Next, we're going to have IEA, IFT, School Management, and Ed Red come up and testify. Again, please state your name and organization for the record. We have all professionals here. You guys are used to this stuff, so I know you'll be quick. And then we can have more time for questions. We'll start with you, Alice.
Good morning, or is it afternoon now? Afternoon officially. Good afternoon, and thank you for including the Illinois Statewide School Management Alliance as a participant in this hearing. The Statewide School Management Alliance includes the Illinois Principals Association, Illinois Association of School Boards, Illinois Association of School Administrators, and Illinois Association of School Business Officials. My name is Allison Maley, and I serve as Government and Public Relations Director for the Illinois Principals Association. And with me today, I have Miriam Brotine, who is Assistant General Counsel for the Illinois Association of School Boards. I will be brief as possible. To begin, we want to make clear that our organizations condemn the unlawful seclusion or restraint of students. State law prohibits certain types of rooms or enclosures for timeout purposes, and previous administrative rules also stated that isolated timeout may be used only to the extent that are necessary to preserve the safety of students and others. Isolated timeout or physical restraint has been and continues to be prohibited for administering discipline to individual students as a form of punishment. It is disappointing and heartbreaking to learn of situations that did not meet these strict standards. In this discussion of the proposed legislation, we want to acknowledge that there are times that seclusion or timeout, if you will, may be necessary to ensure the safety of an individual student or the safety of other students and staff. This must be done with the safety of all involved in mind and in accordance with the law, administrative rules, and board policies. Proper training, adequate resources, and oversight is necessary to ensure the safety of the student in crisis and others within the school. If the intent of the legislation is to prohibit isolating a student without any supervision from an adult, we would likely support this change. Many of the examples we've read about are highly problematic and likely led to unnecessary trauma. However, if the intent is to prohibit seclusion in any form, including timeout, the legislation removes a useful de-escalation tool for students in crisis, as well as educators seeking to ensure the safety of themselves and others. If there are no means for a student to de-escalate away from other students or staff, we are concerned about the consequences of violent behaviors occurring in classrooms and threatening others. There are many examples of schools and districts, likely from many of your districts as well, that have sensory rooms or areas separate from other students that could be prohibited by this legislation. And we are too seeking clarity on definitions of what that means. School leaders we have heard from often cite the use of sensory or calming rooms to aid in de-escalation. Often these are quiet or private spaces under adult supervision for children to calm themselves, or active spaces to release energy safely, such as swinging, climbing, running, carrying, using weighted items, etc. So finally, while emergency rules are in place, permanent rules are proposed, and proposed legislation are all on the table, there is confusion in the field for definitions. What is allowed, what isn't allowed, is our sensory room still allowed? Those types of things are causing some confusion in the field. And we stand ready to help address the unlawful examples we all learned about, and we hope to provide a workable solution for students, families, and educators that protects the safety of everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you. IFT or IM?
Good morning. Chairpersons Bertino Tarrant Musman, Vice Chairs Crespo and Belt, Spokespersons Bourne and Weaver, and members of the committee. My name is Dan Montgomery. I'm president of the Illinois Federation of Teachers, 103,000 members around the state. Before I became that, I was an English teacher in Skokie, Niles North High School, District 219, for 18 years. And one of the best things I did as an English teacher was become certified in life-based crisis intervention training. And I would note that that certification was 42 hours of training. And one of our real concerns, I'll speak to it a little bit later, is the proposed rules for 8 hours of training. And we see that as wholly insufficient. But I do want to say the IFT does not support the use of isolation as a form of discipline. As a parent and teacher, I was disturbed and angered and saddened to read the ProPublica and Tribune articles. And the IFT agrees with ISB's decision and the proposed legislation and the practice. Additionally, we have questions and concerns about what will be done to implement the alternative responses and strategies for students who are in crisis and who at times pose a physical threat to themselves, to other students, and to school staff. We would like to see a thoughtful and comprehensive approach to the issue and would encourage the discussion around potential alternatives to be situated within a larger discussion regarding school culture and climate. We would ask that all stakeholders, including practitioner representatives, play a key role in the discussion. Students need fully staffed schools and access to skilled professionals who are trained to support their academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs. A real concern we have about going forward in this is, I'll just use the word equity. You know, we know that black and brown children, boys especially, are overdiagnosed into special ed and overexposed to practices like this, exclusion and seclusion, and timeouts and things like that. So that has to be at the forefront of how we go forward, is thinking about enabling all our schools to be better in that regard. Creating trauma-responsive environments will require that all members of a school community receive sustained, high-quality professional learning in trauma-informed restorative practices. In addition, ISB needs to be staffed up so that they can perform the oversight that Representative Crespo was talking about. I would say that you can't expect one without the other. These practices were banned, at least in rule, before, right? And so, and the article showed there was lots of recordings at the local level of these instances and nothing was done with them. So there does need to be better oversight, and ISB has to have the capacity to do that somehow. Unless there is a real sea change in how we train our staffs in schools, you can't expect oversight to make a difference, I think. One of the responsibilities entails actively monitoring the use of timeout and physical restraint and providing guidance to districts and schools when necessary. I have a lot more to say about training, and I'm happy to do that. I'll reserve, if anyone wants to do that in the question format, for time. But I appreciate the opportunity to testify and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we have two people here from IEA who are going to make quick statements.
Hi, my name is Sean Brody. This is my 6th year as a school psychologist. My last 4 years I've spent at a public-private therapeutic day school working with K through 8 students. I've also spent many years as a paraprofessional both in private and public schools. Our school really focuses on positive and academic and emotional supports for our students, especially for those with behavioral and emotional challenges that in the past. We have a range of students with many disabilities, including ADHD, autism, specific learning disabilities, and other emotional disabilities. I thoroughly enjoy my job, working with my students and their families, helping them grow and become successful. Ultimately, our goal of our program and of our schools is to get those students back to their home school so that they can build those skills to have better social relationships and be able to manage their emotions, become less impulsive during this time. It's been a joy to see them become so successful, to return to their home schools, get back to their home schools for high school, and graduate and be successful in society. So I want to thank you all for allowing me to be on this panel, and I'll be happy to take any of your questions.
And for those that may not be aware, a home school is we just may have a district that places a school in our building.
Please state your name for the record.
Sorry, Alicia Ammons with the IEA. A home school may place a student within a district, and then we want to get that student back to where they're not secluded with students that we service that are 100% in special ed setting. So my name is Alicia Ammons. I'm an 8th-year teacher in a special ed co-op. The building that I am services students that have 100% disabilities with an IEP, most of them with a emotional disability. I love the students. I love what I do. I even became a guardian for one of my students whose mother deceased, and he's lived with me for 5 years. Empowering students to make right decisions for life, giving them hope and love is what our program is about. I love hearing firsthand at the end of the year, we have a meeting where we acknowledge all the kids, the parents come together, they get to leave early, and hearing the difference we make in families. A family says, man, before my student came to your program, they were not the student they are now. I'm not sure what you did, but thank you. So we're committed to making a difference in students, and we want what we do not to impair that process, but to make it better. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, my good friend, Ms. Hartwick.
Thank you. Yes, Sarah Hartwig with EdRed, a suburban school district advocacy organization. I want to thank you all for the hearing today and the opportunity to speak as a first step of what I see as being a very collaborative process to address the disappointing is not the right word to use, but the reporting that was done of what was happening in schools, and EdRed looks forward to working with everyone to address that problem in a way that looks at the issue holistically. I think a lot what was mentioned with my fellow panelists is spot on, the need for training, the need for staffing, the need for funding, and how special education funding works within the formula, and then how it works outside of the evidence-based funding formula when it comes to students with access costs and the things that districts are doing. There have been recent efforts by the General Assembly to look at the special education funding piece. I mean, that was done over about 10 years ago, and a lot of the research has changed, and the methods have changed, and the environment has changed, even with the cultural piece that was mentioned also with a fellow panelist. So I thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and again, just really look forward to working to find solutions.
Thank you, everyone. We have about 20 minutes for questions. We're going to start with Representative Carroll.
Thank you very much. I have a question for the School Management Alliance. So do we have examples of any school districts that actually did a good job of tracking information, keeping track of data, all those things? Because what I'm hearing a lot of is a lot of, God, we're so outraged by this. This is such a horrible thing, this, that, and the other. But I mean, it happened under the roofs of your buildings and a lot of the schools that you represent. Do we have a good tracking of data from any school districts?
I don't know that we have data on hand, but I can tell you that as tragic as the Tribune and ProPublica articles were, the practices that were revealed are not reflective of the entirety of the state. The laws that have been on the books are adhered to by many school districts. I think it's important that we not paint a broad brush and say that all school districts are behaving in this manner.
I don't think I said that to you. So
Okay.
let me be clear. That's not what I said. You're
Okay.
putting words in my mouth. What I asked you is, do you have any examples of school districts that did a good job of tracking this process?
I do not have any on hand, but I'm happy to get that for you. I know that we have a very robust Illinois Council of School Attorneys that works with many co-ops and school districts that did have data and submitted it to the State Board of Education in response to Dr. Ayala's request for data, and that there were many that did not have any worries that their data would reflect bad practices.
Because I don't really think it's productive for us to start circling the wagons and trying to protect our members. What we're trying to do is move forward and get the best legislation forward. So I hear what you're saying. I understand why you're on the defensive. That's fine, but that's not what we're trying to do here. So I'm just trying to get information so Senator Gillespie, myself, people on this panel can put forth the best legislation to make sure that we are protected. So I want to be clear on that. Thank you very much.
All right. Just for the record, Mrs. Broteen, could you just state your name and everything into the record so that the transcribers have your voice?
Sure. This is Miriam Broteen. I'm Assistant General Counsel at the Illinois Association of School Boards.
Thank you. Next question is with Senator Rezin.
Thank you. Sarah, can you talked briefly at the end about the students with excess costs, and I know that this is a topic that we have been struggling with regarding education funding. Can you go over how that portion is currently funded And if you feel it's appropriate, I know we've talked about pulling it outside of the education funding formula and just, having a pool of state dollars for students who fall within this area. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
So the access cost, I believe, is outside of the formula right now. It is not within that about 300 million. That's funds for students with I think it's just funding for children is maybe what it's called now, but for students with special needs. The access cost, the state only funds half of those costs. In 2019, the state funded just 37.2%. And students with special needs, another concern with the way that it's funded is students with special needs who qualify under access costs have also been underreported due to the historical lack of reimbursement. And only in the past few years have districts received funds at all for these students. There were years that there was not reimbursement at all, and I'm happy to get some more data to show you the historical funding of that and kind of what the mechanics of how that works.
So you're saying essentially that the funding component is fine, but we just need to fully fund it.
We need to fully fund it. There's also the portion, and I don't think we have time to get into it here, but there's also the piece of, the way that districts can be incentivized to send students to private facilities as opposed to keeping them within the school district. I know that's an issue that a number of my members have started to discuss. They see it's best to service the student within their home school, but because of the reimbursement rates, they're just not financially able to do that. But that is a bigger topic for another time. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Representative Gon-Gershowitz?
Yeah, thank you all for being here. There are so many questions, related to, how to unwind what is, I think we can all recognize an incredibly, difficult and complex issue. But one of the questions that it seems to be coming up, recurringly here is with respect to accountability. And, in my view, data is only meaningful and worthwhile if those whose responsibility it is to collect and receive that data have the capacity and the tools to do something with it. So my question is, if somebody is found to be non-compliant with respect to the law related to the use of seclusion rooms, what is the consequence for non-compliance? For example, the EEOC has the responsibility, its sole responsibility is to enforce violations of federal discrimination laws, employment discrimination laws. Do we have any mechanism to enforce non-compliance? So if we're collecting the data, what happens with it if a school district is found to be non-compliant?
I'd say that's a great question, and we'd all like to know the answer to that, because there is no mechanism right now for that. In fact, there has been confusion among schools over what is going to happen with the data that was requested by ISB.
So we're collecting data, and what I'm hearing is nothing's happening with it. It's just data.
Actually, I believe it's possible that a future panel may be able to answer that question better. So let's give them an opportunity to ask again.
Okay, I'll hold that question, but I'd like an answer.
Yeah, they're the collectors.
All right, Representative Conroy?
So my question is more from a student's parent perspective. IEPs are legal documents, correct? So my concern is, are we fully educating our parents to understand that they have legal rights that are put in writing through their IEP? Because I don't think we're doing a good enough job of that. And that is a recourse for our parents. So when something is done that violates that IEP, they have the legal recourse to do something about it. I feel that we are doing a woefully poor job of educating our parents as to what that document actually means and having the tools to advocate for that student. I believe that that is a way to hold these types of things accountable, and I think we need to do a better job of educating our parents and enabling them to be advocates for their students.
Senator Gillespie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Montgomery, we talked about training, and I'd like to get, I know I asked this in the previous panel as well, but I'd like to get a little more specific on different levels of training. So I'm hearing that we want everybody who works in a school, basically, to be educated on de-escalation techniques. And then you talked about the 42-hour certification one. So are there variations in the level of training for different personnel in the schools? And can you just comment on that briefly?
Sure. Yeah, there can be. I mean, there are a lot of models out there that we think are good models that districts could adopt and schools could adopt. But in general, you know, training has been, in our experience in talking to our practitioners, insufficient. And if you just look at the proposed rule, says 8 hours. I can tell you, 8 hours will be a one-day in service, and it might not even be specifically on this sort of thing. I think the legislation, or certainly the rules, could be much clearer, sort of harder, if you will, on that. Our practitioners will tell you that you need systemic, sustained training over time. And I almost, honestly, I was thinking about the 737 crisis, and those pilots that weren't trained when something really went badly with those planes. When you are not trained fully, repeatedly, consistently, over time, when bad things happen, emotions kick in. Right. And that's when things really go haywire. So, we do in the IFT, we've done trainings for years for our members. By far, our most popular training now is trauma-informed instruction. It's 18 hours at like the very first cursory level. We're adopting a second course. I can tell you, after doing 42 hours of life space crisis intervention training, which is fantastic, I still, that really helped me as a general educator de-escalate. Any educator deals with, sad to say, violence in schools. Students who are coming into class with severe trauma. I mean, that's the world we're in now, right? But I still, after 42 hours, wouldn't have felt that I was equipped to routinely deal with the most vulnerable, the most challenged students in that sort of setting. So broad-based, supported by the administration. We find time is a real issue, where they're great trainings, but often, we're told, there's just not the time to do that. There's obviously cost to that and staffing issues and things, staffing fully. But I think, what happens often, look, in the United States, you probably all know this, teachers in the United States spend more time teaching in classroom than anywhere in the world, and we spend less time than anywhere in the world getting trained and doing professional development. And if the issue we're looking at now that was brought to light by these articles, thankfully, isn't a wake-up alarm about how we have to provide intense, sustained, systemic, a sort of rich training and ongoing training for our staff, I don't know what is. I hope that helps answer your question.
It does. I would love to see the models if you've got some to recommend.
Yeah.
I particularly note the sustainability feature, because a one-time training isn't going to do much. But in my experience, it's more than that. You can train, but in some of the examples we saw in the articles, and in the research, it's indicating that people might have been trained, but there's a cultural issue. There's just the fact that if you've got a small room where you can lock somebody up, something's going to happen, right? So I do think it's a multi-pronged approach we need to do, but I'd really like to hear more about the different kinds of training, different models.
Happy to share that with you. And I should say, too, it isn't just the staff, it's really the community, too. And this kind of training needs to be culturally embedded in the schools and districts. It needs to bring in parents, as the representative sort of highlighted. And then I think, too, that there has to be a lot of thinking and training about if there ever has to be a student removed from an educational setting for safety purposes, that removal is considered a sort of learning experience, too, and how that that student is brought back as quickly as possible to in-class time, and that there's that becomes a learning experience for the community of that school. So.
We have two more questions, and then we will get to the next panel. So we have one more. So we have three more, and then we will get to the next panel. Again, after this, please stick around in case we bring you back for further questions. Thank you.
Representative Villa.
Thanks. So the way that I see it, there's different groups of students that we're talking about here. Some of the students have functional behavior assessments with, over 30 hours of assessment being looked at and writing a behavior intervention plan for the student, which could possibly include some timeout room, which then if you go into the crisis plan, you have to document and write out all the steps and all of that. So that's one group of students. But I'm thinking about the 1/3 of the students who were maybe non-SPED or didn't have an FBA BIP who are being sent to these rooms. So what are the rules around documenting for that? Do we have rules for that? As Leader Crespo alluded to, there is legislation already on the books of what's supposed to be happening when a student is placed in one of these rooms. So can you help clarify what those rules are that are already on the books?
I guess that would be me. So the rules that are on the books do not specify whether they apply only to the special education population or to the general education population. Indeed, they're found in the portion of the administrative code that applies to the general education population. But in order to use isolated timeout, which I'm going to keep using that word isolated timeout. I know the replacement word suggested in the legislation is seclusion, but I want to distinguish that from a regular timeout, which might be a student-initiated coping mechanism that they're taught, hey, I feel like I'm getting emotional, I'm going to request a timeout. So in order for a school to have an isolated timeout or physical restraint as an allowable in an imminent risk situation, they need to have that in their board policy. And so then when that is the case, it's open to anybody. And while the majority of these cases probably do occur with students with special education and IEPs, it's certainly possible that they happen to students with, for example, Section 504 plans or individual health care plans, or students with undiagnosed trauma. And perhaps this incident that triggers a safety concern is the first red flag that signals to the educators, hey, maybe we need to look closer at this student. So the way the laws are currently written, it is applicable to everyone, but only if a school district chooses to implement them in that fashion. Based on what I know, and this is just anecdotally, I'd have to take a look, I believe many school districts do not include it as something in their policies for gen ed students, and it's only used in the special education settings. And then regardless of what setting you're using it in, you must follow the documentation and reporting and training and physical space requirements set forth in the current version of the administrative rules.
So in my district, there was things like, after a certain amount of minutes, you have to contact the nurse, if not an administrator. After a certain amount of time, you have to contact the parent. Like, is that just we were doing that best practice, or is that something that has to be done?
I'd have to do a side-by-side comparison, but many of those things are currently in the administrative code as required to be done. It's possible a school may increase those and, for example, require checking in on the student more often than every 15 minutes or reporting back to the parent more frequently than what's mandated in the code. But many of those things are already in there.
Okay, and one just last question. Out of all of these schools that were looked at, and the ones specifically who had all of the students who did not have IEPs, or it couldn't be documented why they were being put into these rooms, how many of those schools are underfunded?
I don't know, but I would hazard a guess it's most of them.
Thank you.
Representative LaPointe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about training and a question about monitoring, in particular capacity at ISB. First of all, I will share that years ago I went through a 40-hour therapeutic crisis intervention training, and as people won't be surprised, the bulk of what I learned was how to de-escalate without any sort of physical intervention, and that's something we should all keep in mind as the goal. In terms of that more robust 40-hour therapeutic crisis intervention training, or whatever we want to call it, this might be an absurd question, but are there ever any times in schools in Illinois where nobody is in the building that has actually had that training? And I ask because, as we know, kind of based on the CTU strike recently, there are times when there's no nurses in the building and no social workers in the building. So I just want to know if that's ever the case.
Well, I mean, I can't tell you for sure, but my guess would be yes, because in my experience, I mean, that training like that was often reserved for special ed teachers. And not the general. This also ties into the representative's earlier question. I think kind of the premise of that, like what happens, why is this happening, and why did it happen outside even the special ed realm? And I think it speaks to the need for training of all staff in the school because some of them, some of the most. I was a high school teacher. Some of the most violent and difficult situations I ever encountered. In fact, all of them were not in class. They were outside in the hallways of the building or the cafeteria, and so. And those spaces are subject to everybody, to janitors and staff and lunchroom personnel and bus drivers and the like. So, yeah. So I mean, I would say I'm sure there are plenty of places that haven't had this kind of training. 40 hours or whatever is a lot. I grant you, and I'm not saying it's the only way you can do it, but intense training like this needs to be supported, and I would endorse it for all staff.
I would too. And my other question is NASW and IFT both specifically mentioned that ISB does not have sufficient monitoring capacity. Can you speak to how far we are from where we need to be in terms of the capacity of that state entity? Because I think that is very important for this conversation going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we were just kind of laughing very far. I mean, I can't really speak to that particularly. That's a better question for ISB. But I mean, I think everybody, and I'm not trying to fault ISB for this, I think, but just, everybody looked at this and scratched their head and say, well, if this is being recorded at the district level, where does it go? What happens, right? And why hasn't there been the capacity or charge to supervise that and monitor it? So it's hard for me to answer that question specifically.
Well, I'm glad that you brought it to the table, and as I used to work at a state agency that was in charge of some monitoring, and I think when we ask for data and never look at it, it just contributes to an issue where people who are submitting the data don't take it seriously and think it's going to go into a black hole. So thank you.
Representative Scherer.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. What I have to say, I guess, is very similar to what's been said. First of all, my heart goes out to the students who are put in these positions and to the teachers, administrators, everyone that works in these situations. Having been a teacher myself for 35 years, I have some questions, concerns, and comments. One is redundant, I guess, from what Rep. Villa said earlier, that not all of the students that we're talking about have IEPs. So it is of grave concern that we oftentimes say that these instructions would be in their IEP, but you might have 3 or 4 students in the room that would have an issue like this, and maybe none of them would have an IEP, or maybe one of them. So as I'm speaking not as a rep, but as a teacher, teachers would like guidance from ISB on what do you want us to do within the limits of the law. The legislature now, on the other side, wearing the other hat, we have got to make a very firm commitment to the funding of these training programs, because it is just so unfair to continue doing and operating the way we have been. And we have known, in the education field, we've known for 15 years or longer that this day was coming, because I'll use my own self as an example. I've had how many special ed inclusion students in my classroom, and in my teacher training program, I had 1 special ed class. And that's the only training I ever had. So, you can just see the lawsuits stacking up here against school districts when you're basically throwing teachers to the wolves, and the students aren't getting the services that they need and deserve. The next thing is, I can't say this often enough, the teachers need and want to know what the State Board of Education wants us to do in handling these students. Because I firmly believe this, every teacher wants to do the right thing. It's just that You know, you walk into a classroom and you're told you shouldn't do this and you can't do that and don't ever do this and don't do that. And then when you say, what should you do? Most generally what I've heard today is they need some kind of therapy. And none of us question that. It's just that incident A happens. Saying they need therapy does not give our teachers the tools they need to know what to do right when incident A happens. And so we've got to do a better job of that. Finally, when it comes to the documentation, I would like someone in this panel or the next panel to discuss who's expected. Who is the person expected to do the documentation? Will that person be compensated for doing that? When are they supposed to do the documentation? And if they have other students that they're responsible for, who's going to watch their other students while they do the documentation? If they're expected to document during their prep period, then when are they going to do the preparation for the next class that they're supposed to teach? Because this, as a teacher, has happened to anybody in this room that knows anything about teaching knows. So an incident happened, and now you've got to document it. So when are you going to document it? You document it during your first available prep period, right? So then now you've used your whole prep period for that. And now you've got to teach, and during your prep period, you were supposed to prepare, and you weren't able to do it. So now we're not only harming the child that this happened to, but we're harming all the children in the classroom who now have a teacher that isn't prepared, and the reason the teacher isn't prepared is because we as legislators are demanding that they do all these things, but we're giving them no resources, and we're not even really explaining to them what we expect them to do. We're just telling them what not to do and to document what you just did wrong. That's just not a good plan, and we need to do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Crespo.
Thank you, Madam. Just real quick, Ms. Brotine, you answered Representative Villa's question in regards to statutes, and I think you had mentioned that the requirements in statute are in the code that references the general population. How does that impact this at all? Is it in the wrong code? Is it in the wrong section?
I don't believe it's in the wrong section. It is up to school districts at this time to determine whether or not they would even make isolated timeout or physical restraint available as an intervention in the general population. And if it's something that's only available to certain populations. Now, it is not to be used as a punitive measure or a disciplinary measure. And I think there is some merit to not, no matter how this reshapes, it should be available. It should be a tool that's available in whatever reformed form to everyone. Because, as we've discussed a bit on this panel, you may have a student put themselves or others in imminent risk of danger when they haven't otherwise been flagged for special education services. But it's up to you guys, the legislative body. If you want to say, no, this is a tool that will only be available to the special education population, then certainly that would be changed in the law, and then in the administrative code, it would be moved to a different part, to the special education part.
What's your recommendation?
My recommendation would be that we keep it available to more than just students with individualized education plans.
So where it resides today?
Correct. Because,
Okay.
for example, you might have a student, for example, with ADHD who only has a Section 504 plan because at this stage in their education, they have maybe presented with certain problems that can be accommodated. And as they mature and as they change and as hormones become involved and different things occur, that student may present differently. And so it might not be until that incident happens that you then realize, okay, we need to be able to control the situation.
But if it includes the general population, it's also including this smaller group anyway, right?
Correct. It would be more inclusive.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for your time. As I said, please stick around in case we have some further questions. Last, we have the Illinois State Board of Education. I think Ms. Elliott is going to make a statement, then we'll open it up for questions to any of the panel here.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. The State Board of Education was appalled and deeply saddened by the horrifying instances of seclusion and physical restraint revealed in the ProPublica and Chicago Tribune investigations. ISB took immediate and swift action on November 20th to institute emergency rules to end these abuses in Illinois schools. On December 9th, the State Board proposed permanent rules that will ensure the trauma described in those articles never happens to another Illinois student. ISB's proposed permanent rules ban harmful practices that are not necessary to safely de-escalate crisis situations, such as prone restraint and the placement of students alone in locked rooms. The rules clarify the narrow and strict parameters under which restraint and timeout are allowed in order to protect the safety of students and staff under threat of imminent physical danger. The rules also institute stronger requirements for staff training and greater oversight, accountability, and transparency for these practices going forward. Throughout this process, ISB's #1 focus and priority has been and is the safety and well-being of Illinois students. ISB has worked every step of the way in partnership with advocates in schools, many of which we heard from today, and we'd like to thank them for the many hours that were spent over the last several weeks helping us with the rules. The emergency rules included a provision that allowed ISB to collect data on prior years' use of restraint and seclusion. I did want to address that, Representative Gahn-Gershowitz. We required districts to submit data from the previous 2.5 school years and are currently reviewing the submitted data for violations. If violations are found, we will initiate investigations and pursue disciplinary actions. We currently have 9 investigations pending. Sanctions could include for individuals professional development and licensure sanctions, up into including revocation and criminal charges. For schools, recognition status could be impacted, which would impact their funding. Our work is not done. We are grateful for the General Assembly's attention and look forward to discussing the bills put forth by Representative Carroll and Senator Gillespie. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you on the details so that we arrive at final bills that protect the health and safety of Illinois students. And we look forward to taking any questions. And I'm joined by our our legal officer, Tricia Olson, and our executive director of programs, which includes special education, Heather Calamise.
Thank you. I'm going to break protocol and start off with questions myself. You know, we've heard, and I think we repeatedly heard this, and all 3 panels will attest to this. We hear about training, we hear about oversight, and we hear about resources. And we recognize the problems that we have. Everyone hears these situations. I can tell you, I've been up here with Leader Crespo before. You know, we hear these devastating stories, and then we come here to take action. And it's the same 3 things, though, that we need. We need training, we need oversight, and we need resources to help our teachers. So what do you think, and this is a tough question. How can we change this scenario? What really is needed to change this scenario? And for me, again, we hear about teacher preparation programs. Do we need to start revisiting how we train our teachers who go into the classroom? Again, a lot of it is different from when I was trained, but a lot of it is still the same. And can you tell me, is ISB looking at that? Are we working with our higher ed community to look at how we are actually preparing our teachers for schools in the 21st century?
So that is one of the components of the strategic plan that the State Board of Education is currently in the process of rolling out. Elevating educators is one of the 3 goals of the strategic plan, and working with educator preparation programs to ensure that our educators are appropriately prepared, working with teachers unions, school management to make sure that they are ready for situations they face in the classroom is definitely a priority of the State Board of Education.
And I briefly asked you, and I'm going to take it back from when I was the regional superintendent. When we had special education concerns, we were not allowed to investigate them. So when calls came in that they felt like a school district wasn't doing something appropriate, the regional superintendent, while we don't have any direct control because the school board has the direct control, we were able to call and address and say, this is not how it's supposed to go. Here's the law. Special education was always something we had hands off, and I'm assuming a lot because there's a lot of federal regulation, and ISB wanted to take control of that. Can we see that changing at all? Because again, we have these regional superintendents who know their districts, who know their communities, who have relationships, and who are better. It's a closer step for parents to call their regional superintendent as it is to get an 800 number at ISB. Is that something we can revisit?
I think at the State Board of Education, we recognize that at the State Board of Education level, we recognize that there is a need to engage our regional superintendents and the regional offices. We have developed a regional services department that we are staffing now so that we can address concerns on a more intensive regional level than we have previously in the past. And we fully intend to utilize those resources. I think previously in the past, when you look at how special education was handled on a regional level, you were limited to things like review of timeout rooms or review of health, life, safety conditions. And I think it's reasonable to expect that we will enhance that as we develop this department. I also want to emphasize that we are in the process of putting together a new department that has yet to be named, but it is aimed. The first aim is going to be addressing the additional monitoring and oversight that is going to be required to address the 2.5 years worth of data and the data that we are taking in going forward on this very issue. But we are not wanting to have this be just a siloed group or siloed department. We want this to be student-centered so that we can make the best practice decisions for the students in the state of Illinois.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your time. Senator Gillespie?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because we've heard a lot about the resources, and a lot of the other panelists have indicated that you don't have the resources you need to do proper oversight. So two-part question. First, in the ideal world, if you could design it today, what would your oversight authority be specifically? And then secondly, what resources would you need beyond what you have to do to carry that out?
So I think that we have the authority that we need to investigate, and we are planning to utilize that right now. We are currently, like I said, there are 9 pending investigations. As far as resources go, the budget request, the budget recommendation from the state board, it will be coming out next week. It's part of the state board discussion, so it is pending that discussion. It may have some funding requests to support this work.
Okay.
So I don't have a dollar amount today, but would next week.
So
presumably.
you see your oversight responsibility as being reactive to incidents, and that you have the authority to investigate that?
What we intend to do is we get documentation in, and again, we've just started to receive the 2.5 years worth of data that was due at the end of December. We've already initiated our review process for those. But as we continue to go through and review incidents as they come in on our new form that's been developed, we don't intend for it to be totally reactive to individual student instances. Certainly we will investigate those instances as they happen, but we will also be looking at it for larger data trends. Can we see if there is a district, an individual actor, an individual school that requires additional support, and we aim to provide that in a technical advisory or technical assistance capacity.
Okay. Do you see a role for local oversight bodies separate from yours, like boards of education, and could you describe what you think that role would be?
Certainly. If you look at the original rule that was in place, there was a part of that rule, it was 1.280, that required there be a school board policy. We've incorporated that into our emergency rulemaking and into the proposed rule going forward so that it's all combined in one spot. And so we do want there to be local school board policies and local oversight. We anticipate that they will have a big role in shifting their own personal culture and climate in the schools. So that is part of how ISB intends to help refocus the schools and the localities to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Gon-Gershowitz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick follow-up question. You mentioned that you're currently reviewing 2.5 years worth of data that was due December 31st. Is that part of an ongoing review that normally takes place every 2.5 years? Or was it precipitated by this inquiry? And, what was is this a new process for reviewing data and actually opening investigations? You mentioned there are 9 investigations pending. When were those opened, and is that just in response to this inquiry?
So 8 of the investigations began, I believe it was November 19th. The Deputy Governor Ruiz filed state complaints on behalf of the students named in the article. So those, we have 60 days to respond to those complaints. The 9th complaint was a result of an email we received from a member of the public. So those are the 9 pending investigations. The 2.5 years of data was a result of internal discussions. We felt like it was very important for us to go back and look and see what has been happening in Illinois schools over, we felt like the last 2.5 years was a good chunk of time to begin and look and see what has been going on. Like Tricia said, are there issues in certain districts, certain areas that we can begin to look at and identify issues? We won't just look at this every 2.5 years. The rules do include requirements now for districts to submit these forms to ISB within the proposed permanent rules require within 2 school days for us to receive these forms. So we'll now be receiving them on a regular basis.
So prior to this, was there any regular review of data with respect to the use of seclusion rooms or any ongoing monitoring or accountability for noncompliance with state law?
I do want to clarify, the forms that were required under the previous iteration of the rules, the forms required that there be notice to families and notice to parents. That could be waived, but that is where the forms went. The forms were not collected by the State Board of Education. The forms were not assessed by us. We did not do any data review or analysis of those forms. They were kept locally and shared with families.
Okay, so this is really your first opportunity to look at this globally and come up with a comprehensive plan for how we address it going forward. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Representative Willis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm having some difficulty wrapping my head around this, that we had rules to some extent that, or guidelines, if you want to go with that, on how to use isolation rooms, but nobody was overseeing it. Nobody was following through to make sure that these rules were actually being followed. And if something was found by a fluke that somebody was not following these rules, nothing was being done. Am I correct in the assessment of what we've heard throughout the day?
If I can just, there were certain steps and processes in place, but they were not a formal State Board of Education review of aggregate data of individual instances. So for example, in the previous iteration, what you had was the opportunity for parents to receive the information and utilize complaint procedures that they had under, if they are a special education eligible student, they would have complaint procedures under IEP provisions, or they would be able to file a due process request or a state complaint with the State Board of Education. So we did see that there were some state complaints and that there were some due process requests that would deal with the issue of timeout and restraint, but they were handled on a much more individual and case-by-case basis in those venues previously. There was not the aggregate level, the state level review that you see now from the State Board of Education.
And the bottom line is, the only reason this is happening is because we had a newspaper article that came out and showed how atrocious things were being done, and with a lack of follow-through and follow-up on this. Here's my biggest concern that I'm seeing as we go forward with this. I'm glad that the State Board is finally stepping up. And it's sad that we're being reactive instead of proactive, but hopefully after we get through this, we'll have a proactive stance on that, and that's great, and I'm happy to see that. But I also have a huge concern, and I've sat on this committee for 7.5 years, and I've seen many, many things that come through, and the worst is the special ed procedures for CPS, and we have a federal monitor that does jack nothing. Absolutely nothing gets done with that. And I don't want to see the result of this coming through with the same thing, having a federal monitor that does absolutely nothing. Having somebody that's their job is to oversee and make sure it's there. I think it's got to be twofold. We need to have more than one person's going to do this. If we're going to look at the entire state, it can't fall to just one person. We've got that in the city of Chicago, and that person, no offense to that person, I don't even know that person, but one person cannot do that job. We need to make sure that we give you the resources on it, but we also, it does absolutely no good for us to go and put in the best procedures possible, all of the checks and balances to make sure that we're looking at it as a therapeutic point and not a penalizing or a punitive issue. But if we don't do anything to give you the resources to do it and follow through to make sure that every individual school district is following these procedures, something's lacking there, and we need to work together on that better. So I hope this is just the beginning of the start of it, but I think that we're seeing that it's unfortunately that we have to wait until we see a big blow up in the newspaper till we take care of in cleaning house on where we need to. So thanks so much for being here, and let's see if we can't get something better going.
If I may address just one issue about the monitor, and I know that this is a different issue, but we have shifted the entire focus of the monitor at the State Board of Education level. It is no longer one person. It is a department. It's a division. We have more than one attorney. We have staff members underneath there. So there has been a shift in how that is viewed, and in part based upon the response and the feedback that we've received. And we agree completely about the need for resources and development of this area for the safety of the students of Illinois.
Thank you. Representative Crespo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, the monitor that was appointed for special ed, that's a state-appointed monitor, not a federal monitor.
Correct.
Correct. There is a federal monitor that was appointed for sexual abuse issues, for CPS.
A different issue, different division.
But
yes.
that was a federally mandated monitor. Okay, just for the record. And by the way, I've been in office close to 14 years, and I can tell you that I've enjoyed working with this administration, the new administration at the State Board of Education. The superintendent, you guys have been very responsive, so thank you for that. And I know the issue that we had with the state-appointed monitor, that happened under the previous administration. I know we've had conversations about that, and I think both of you and the superintendent have been responsive. I think there's a more robust mechanism in place now to monitor CPS and special education, so kudos to that. I want to talk about two things. One, you talked about the reports that you're going back 2.5 years. I imagine, I think these are reports that you're getting from the schools or school districts, correct?
Correct.
And you also talked about notices that the parents get, two different things. So let me talk about the reports, the data, or whatever you're getting from the school districts. Is this based on self-reporting?
I want to make a distinction between what we are collecting now going forward versus what we're asking for the 2.5 years in the past. And for your information, what has to be provided now for incidents that happen going forward is a mandated form that we have put out that can be filled out by any individual in the school. It could be an administrator, it could be a teacher, it could be a nurse, and that is required within 48 hours. What the 2.5
48 hours of what?
Of the incident.
What if they don't, how do you know if they're submitting a report after an incident occurred?
We ask for information, dates and times.
Again, it's just based on self-reporting moving forward.
We are.
Let me rest. Let me go back to the 2.5 years that you're looking at now. What reports are those? Are those, did all the school districts comply and submit the reports we're supposed to submit during that period of time?
At this point in time,
can you say your name for the record, please?
Heather Calamise. At this point in time, our team is currently working through the documents. The priority are the 9 complaints and working through those documents that were submitted. We are working on compiling a list of those school districts, but those documents were due to ISB by December 20th. We've received thousands of emails, thousands of documents. Our team is working through those at this point in time, but we will have a list of districts that have complied with the deadline of December 20th.
Have all the districts complied?
At this point in time, I do not know, because our team, again, is working through the thousands of emails that were sent to ISB.
So are these reports emails or standard reports?
So they are sent via email, in the email format. The school districts for the prior 2.5 years are sending in their district forms that they used and attaching those to emails.
So each school district has a different form?
They perhaps may, yes.
Now, you understand the problem with that, right? I mean, you can go back 2.5 years, you can have a whole array of different kind of reports. I'm not sure what kind of sense you're going to make out of this. So I appreciate you reporting to this committee that you're going to go back 2.5 years, but let's be honest. We don't know the quality of the reports that you're going to get. It's garbage in, garbage out, so we don't know what you're going to be able to determine based on those reports.
We appreciate the fact that as we go through these reports, we anticipate it's going to take quite a bit of time because there's no standardization that was required at that point in time. There was nothing that said certain elements had to be in the report. It had to be, a notice to families at that point in time.
So you're going to identify some things, but there are a lot of other things that will not be able to be identified because we just don't know.
I think we are making our best attempt at this point to.
So let me talk briefly about the notices to the parents from the schools. Because if I recall, the article did state that the law requires schools to notify families in writing within 24 hours. Each day a child is secluded, and they state that that doesn't always happen. And while some notices describe the incident, others are form letters with just a checkbox to indicate a child was secluded. Are those the notices that you're talking about?
The notices to the parents are those documents that you're talking about, yes.
So they're deficient, you would agree?
The previous iterations of them. The form that we require now is a standardized form.
Can you share that with the committee at some point moving forward? And granted, again, thanks to the press to identify the issue moving forward. We'll try to do the right thing. I have full faith in the State Board of Education. I think you guys are going to do a good job. But I'm trying to understand what happened prior to this. And I appreciate the fact that you're going to take time and effort in reviewing those reports that you're getting from the school districts. I'm not expecting much from it. I think we'll see some things you might be able to identify, but they're not comprehensive, they're not standard. And if a school district decides not to submit any forms via email, what does the State Board of Education intend to do about that?
They're welcome to drop them off by postal mail or hand delivery as well.
And if they fail to do that?
That is unacceptable. We've asked for this
And what are the
information.
consequences for that?
The consequences for failing to provide this information can be varied. We intend on doing our monitoring and oversight. This is a priority of the superintendent. It fell under our public school recognition section of the code, and under our emergency rules, we're calling for that information under the public school recognition section. So in theory, it could go as far as looking at recognition status for schools.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. So that concludes all our panels. As promised, I asked if anyone needed anyone to come up, but who is on a panel, who has another question. Okay, with that, I'm going to, because it completes our scheduled agenda, I understand Chairwoman Mussman has a parent who would like to, or somebody who would like to testify, but however, I will be departing. Leader Lightford will replace my self as chairwoman for the Senate, and I want to thank the panel, the committee here for attending, for the public for being here today. Again, we recognize this is a serious issue. We thank the governor's office for ensuring that we had swift action taken. We look forward to continuing to approve this situation, obviously much sooner and later, and I thank my chairwoman today. Thank you.
So thank you. I believe that there were a few people in the audience who had come with the hope of making a public presentation, and certainly we want this process to be as inclusive as possible and recognize not only the professionals that are involved in the situation, but the families and individuals that are impacted. So if you would like an opportunity to speak, please just make yourself known, and if you would like to state your name for the record and begin.
Yes, my name is Vanessa Foley. I am a special needs parent. I am also a former CPS parent. I am also a part of LULA, which is Latinas United for Love of Autism. We are a support group, but we also believe in advocacy. And I am a part of the committee that is for advocacy. I am an advocate by necessity because I needed to become an advocate for my child, and not only for my child, but for other children who are like her. I have to say that I was deeply, deeply affected by the article. And Representative Carroll, I read a quote by you that said, "Not all uses of isolation and restraint are evil or malicious." I'm well aware that isolation can be therapeutic. The same can restraint, and we need to determine what is best. So I thank you for saying that. I truly do. Sadly, I was truly not too shocked by the article, but what really angered me was the fact that such criminal abuse went on for so long with little accountability. Where was the oversight? Who was in charge of the oversight? And the fact that it took an article by a reporter to take notice. Yes, there is need for more regulations and transparency. This is what special needs parents have been pleading for years. The schools in the article are what happens when a school lacks proper training, appropriate staff, but it does not excuse the criminal behavior that happened. Training and staffing and pediatric mental health need to become a priority. Training on de-escalation needs to be done on every staff member at a school, not just the special ed staff. Training needs to be more than an 8-hour course. If school districts reach out to companies that provide ABA therapy and have board-certified behavior analysts, they would be willing to come and train a staff for free. Every single school needs a board-certified analyst on staff, as well as social workers, and social workers who are trained in mental health, because many students with autism have comorbid mental health issues as well. BCBAs should be used not just for training teachers. They also should be used for situations that arrive at any notice. They also need to be consulted to help implement and assess behavior plans. There is a deep need for BCBAs and social workers trained with mental health at every single school. My daughter is 9. When she becomes dysregulated, she will throw anything. She screams, she kicks, she bites, and she will run off. She is at risk of harming not only herself, but others around her. What happens when she's no longer 9, but when she is 14? Because guess what? Meltdowns with children with autism don't magically go away. These children get older and bigger. And at times, you really don't know what the trigger is. A perfect example is yesterday. Yesterday, my daughter went to school. We had just finished a 2-week break. It was a really difficult break. We had her transitions, everything about her break was pretty bad. And I was expecting things to go awry yesterday. But what happened? She had continuous meltdowns over and over again throughout the course of the day. She had to go to the resource room to go on a beanbag and have a weighted blanket on her. But that wasn't enough. They had to call in the school social worker to help assist her. They had to call in another LBS because her LBS wasn't in the school. She was sent to the sensory room and was able to go on the swing, but she was also able to calm her body down on a weighted gym mat that was on the floor, a padded gym mat on the floor to help her calm her body. And we are fortunate that I am in a school that has these tools for children like my daughter. When they are in the middle of a meltdown, they are not thinking. They are in the fight or flight mode, and all they want is to calm themselves. And it doesn't matter if a child is verbal or nonverbal. Their bodies are incapable of knowing what they need in that moment. My daughter is verbal, and she has no idea when she hurts anyone. And afterwards, she has a deep sense of remorse because she had no idea what she did, and she feels terrible. The next issue is the way the state of Illinois is not realizing the crisis of pediatric mental health. In the state, if you have private insurance, you will wait to see a pediatric psychiatrist months because most don't take insurance. If you have state insurance or Medicaid, the wait list to see a pediatric psychiatrist is anywhere from 12 months to 2 years. No family should have to wait months or years for their child to receive critical mental health treatment. That follows through into what happens in the schools. This is not just a school issue. It is also a bigger issue. That is the reality. There are not enough facilities. If a child is in crisis and needs to be in an inpatient treatment and there is no bed, they are sent home and the parents are told to call the police if they feel they are in danger. The lack of partial hospitalization programs means that parents have to send their child to a program that's just okay. If a child with autism needs to go to a PHP program, many on the staff are not trained with autism. It's a complex issue with many, many layers, and it has been a crisis for the most vulnerable children for many years. We need the state to do better. We need to provide alternatives. We need to hold accountability for the criminal actions. We need to provide more transparency, to take a real look at every single aspect. And you need to listen to the parents. You need to listen to us. As parents, we live it every day. We are trying to make the best decisions with little options. What I implore you to understand is that this is not a one-topic issue and is much more complex and emotional for families, for students, and for staff, and has a long-lasting, severe impacts and consequences. We need to overhaul the entire system. But we can't overhaul an entire system without looking at every single aspect, including mental health. We need to completely rethink everything. Teens with autism have the highest rate of depression and suicide. There is a desperate need for resources and programs that address these needs. I would like to know what is going to be done. How are we going to change this? I welcome an opportunity to speak to anyone on this committee individually. I truly, truly want the best, not only for my daughter, but for others. But we need help. This is a crisis, and the fact that it took an article by a reporter to get to this point is beyond depressing and disgusting for me as a parent. Listen to us. Listen. We are here to help you understand everything that our children need. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. That is very important for us to hear, and I hope there are more people who are available to make statements. I believe that Representative Conroy has a question or statement.
Wow. Just for the record, you and I have never met, correct? Thank you so much for clearly articulating the core of the problem we are facing and the crisis that we have, not only in our country, in our state, and very prevalently in our schools. Mental health is a crisis, and we are not giving it the resources or the conversations it deserves. A lot of the issues that we talk about, resources, none of what we talked about today had anything to do with mental health resources. We have to begin by treating the children the day they're born and holistically understanding that mental health is a part of the whole health of any person. And by neglecting that in our educational process and in our schools, these are the types of things we're going to see happen. We have to make a commitment. We need our governor to come out and support mental health in our schools for our children and in our state. Thank you for what you said. And please know I chair the Mental Health Committee for the state, and I would really appreciate your voice in my committee.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, thank you very much for having this happen today. The topic obviously is very critical and very important, and I appreciate the comments that were shared, both at the table and my peers here today. I do have a question, and I believe Mr. Dan Montgomery mentioned it just on the side cuff here this morning, and I want to follow back up with this, and it has to do not with the teachers or the parents, but the students that are involved. Okay, and so what I'm asking for, can you clarify? I think a comment was made about the students. Maybe some students are over-identified in one way or the other. This is more of a side issue, but I think it also could impact the folks that we actually have in the room, and that might help us moving forward on this.
That's just fine. If you could just restate your name for the record before you speak.
Alicia Ammons with IEA.
Thank you.
What are you wanting to know regards to the students over-identification? Is that the...
I think Dan made the comment about there's more boys that are over-identified being in the classroom, and I wanted to clarify, or not in the classroom, but in the rooms, and I wanted to clarify, did I hear that right? Is there something else that you can relate that to, or help me out to understand what he was trying to say, I guess, is what I'm trying to...
Yes, that is correct. I think Sean and I can both speak.
What is correct, though? Please clarify if you could.
Males are identified more so. And if you watch any YouTubes and they make fun of boys that are being rough, boys are noticeably roughhousing, and that's just kind of what's expected from a male. And so boys externalize their behaviors and girls internalize more, and so it's more disruptive for the external behaviors, and so males are identified more with ADHD and other things. Sean, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Sean Brody. So with the boys, as we said, as a general rule, they have a tendency to display more of those externalized behaviors. So they may throw things, they may hit things, kick things. Whereas girls, as again, a general rule, not obviously including every single one of them, but they are more likely to internalize their behaviors. They may be more likely to suffer from depression. They may be more involved in self-injurious behaviors. Then they're probably more likely to sit there and be quiet to try and escape the situation, whereas the boys may be more likely to have explosive behavior to get out of the situation. So the girls kind of fly under the radar, whereas we notice those loud, explosive behaviors from the boys more, which is one of the reasons why boys are more likely to be identified for special education and then going to alternative placements.
But yes, I think I understand what you're trying to say, Representative Bennett. Not only are boys overrepresented, but boys of color are at a higher representative level even beyond that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for adding that. Absolutely. Thank you. That was very intriguing. I'm trying to understand more about that perspective. Really.
Can I speak just one more thing to that? Again, Alicia Ammons. What we see in our program a lot is maybe students that are identified with ADHD and such, or high explosive behaviors, but I have junior high boys, and they would much rather, and I think what you were saying is this goes to education as a whole, when We don't identify it when they're young because there's not resources, because we have kindergartens that have 25 to 30 kids, so they're not learning to read. So then by the time we identify it, they're a third, fourth, fifth grader. And a 11, 12-year-old boy, he would rather throw a big fit than look like a fool in front of his peers. And so we see a lot of externalizing behaviors, not just because of that, but also because of learning deficiencies. I have a student in my room that I service right now, and I've learned I can't call him out in front of the group, or not even call him out, just, hey, can I help you? He doesn't want help. So we're a Google Classroom, we're one-to-one with technology, and so I provide little flags, and if we're taking notes in our book, he flags the book. Afterwards, he goes, I help him read it, and he records his notes on his Google Chromebook. We make accommodations, but if that accommodation is in front of the whole group, then that impairs their learning, then they act out or shut down or whatever the behavior is. So that's why we see the acting out a lot.
The acting out, the escalation, and all the things that come with it.
Right. So then the techniques that we use, which haven't been talked about a lot, is the de-escalation. I'm trained in what's called TCI, or Therapeutic Crisis Intervention. And 2 days of that is de-escalation components. So when I mentioned, the noticing of the child, oh, they don't like to read. We may not know what that is. I had a student, and many of our students don't want to go home. So they act out. So I had a student my very first year, I guess I was just keen on this, and he said, you're sending me home because I'm acting out? And I said, yes. And it was not what our school's policy or discipline procedure was, and it was very contrary. I said, if you're good next week and there's a space for you, I will keep you here. But the desired behavior was to act out, so he stayed there. He did not want to go home. So learning those things, and it is individualized, not all of it is special education. It's hard on our general educators. I just went through the Ed Admin program with some very fine staff from a neighboring district, and she's like, I'm the Spanish teacher, and I have more people that are suicidal than I've ever had. I'm the Spanish teacher. What do I do? So
This is
the
high school?
questions, high school, that are being asked are, what do we do? And I think educators are looking for help and supports, and we don't always know what to do, especially in their setting. So I feel trained, and I've been immersed in this for the last 8 years. Like I said, I took on a son, and we have incidences at home that have significantly improved, but it's because he has a strong supports. We have to have what seems to be punitive, but we have to couple it with the PBIS and the other supports too, just to keep students safe. Okay, now we've got you safe. Now let's process through this situation. Here's how we can handle it better. A lot of students have in their IEPs take deep breaths. So I asked one of our counselors, I said, what do you mean take deep breaths? They're like, I don't know. That's the school counselor. So as I've studied restorative practices, the IEA is very big on restorative practices, and I've looked at it. Well, you focus, because it's automated system and non-automated system that breathes. So you can slow your heart down by focusing on the out breath. So we do restorative practices like getting together and doing a body scan. Okay, what do you notice is tense in your body? What do you notice in these things? But I have the time and availability to do that. Do you really have that in a general education? Or, we're putting so much pressure to perform. Do we really have time to do these things? But those are all questions I guess we have to ask. I found it, being in a behavioral program, allow a lot of time for breaks, allow time for the restorative practices, and then if we have to de-escalate, I've built relationship with you, and so now I can come and say, and do this more restrictive. Then from that, we can come back together. I've had 5 students in the last 3 years that have come to me, been in my program a year or two, went back out. They're doing better at home, they're doing better at school, but that's because of the practices we have in place.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, many schools have what the protocol is for children who are in a general education classroom. If they are having a meltdown, they will clear the classroom. Now, if you're a child who has high-functioning autism or ADHD and your classmates have to leave the classroom because you are dysregulated, think about the impact emotionally it has on the child and the impact that it has with their peers in the manner in which they relate to the child who is having, trouble just regulating their body. That is another thing that we have to really take a look at as well.
This is probably part of a bigger issue. Not we're going to resolve today, but I do appreciate the opportunity to share with that, and thank you for coming today.
I have one question. Sorry, Sean Brody, if you may allow me, can I add one more comment on with what she was saying? Each student is an individual. For many of our students that have been exposed or had the need for physical management or seclusion, they've all come from a lot of trauma or different things that have affected them. A lot of them have those IEPs. We set up things in place that will help them be successful for themselves. For one student who may have been physically abused or sexually abused, having someone else place their hands on them can cause them a lot more trauma. As educators, we always try and weigh the risks of what the students need. So for some of our students, they may need that time away at home. Oftentimes, parents say, well, I'll just let them go to their room for 15 minutes, for half an hour, and then they come back out and they're fine. Unfortunately, in education, we can't do that. We have to be aware of what our students are doing, especially for so many of our students who are at risk themselves or others. So with some of the new rules where we can't allow the student to be alone in a room, we've had students that have had bigger behavior because they just want us to leave them alone, and it's something that we have taught them in the past. Now, this doesn't work for everyone. Some students need someone in there, all right? But we really need to make sure that it's appropriate for each and individual student, as opposed to making a blatant statement of just outlawing one practice. And seclusion is one tool, and it should be used as our absolute last resort. And in my school, if we're at to the point where we don't have seclusion and they're continuing to escalate, then the next call is 911 and an ambulance or police involvement. And we know already all the research done on that school-to-prison pipeline. And the research has shown that once they have an involvement with the police, they're more likely to end up in a prison. And it's something we're desperately trying to avoid. And at least in my experience, when we've had students that have either been physically managed or in seclusion, we are able to therapeutically rebuild that relationship with them there at the school. And if we have to call 911, we're not able to do so. It may be a day, it may be a week, it may be 2 weeks, depending on hospitalization and everything else that occurs, before we can try and rebuild that relationship. I've had students that have enjoyed school more than ever because we've working with them and building up therapeutic rapport, even though we've had to use physical management or seclusion. So each student is different, and let's make sure that we give the tools to the staff so that each student can be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see someone else has sat down at the table, so if you could simply state your name and title and make your statement.
Yes, my name is Miranda. My name is Miranda Johnson. I'm a clinical professor and director of the Education Law and Policy Institute at Loyola University Chicago School of Law. I'm speaking on my individual capacity. Actually did not come here intending to testify, but I did want to address the issue of racial disproportionality that was recently raised, because I think it's critical to this conversation. I come to the question of seclusion and restraint based on both the perspective of having represented students and parents, both general education and special education students in the school discipline processes, as well as having filed a state complaint with respect to the use of seclusion and restraint on a gen ed student who is a kindergartner. I also come to this conversation with the background of having worked with school districts throughout the state on the process of implementing school discipline reform. And I see Senator Lightford in the room. She's certainly been a champion and leader on the issue of school discipline reform, and I think the lessons of the implementation of school discipline reform are critical to this conversation and should be considered as we look at the path forward with respect to seclusion and restraint. Specifically with respect to racial disproportionality, what we found is that Black and brown students, specifically Black students, are overrepresented in terms of school discipline practices. And I think that also is true in terms of the use of seclusion and restraint. What literature suggests is that the overuse of these practices with respect to students of color is specifically, it cannot be solely based on students' experiences or behaviors. In fact, it's related to educator bias and challenges that are deep-rooted with respect to racism within our educational system. So you can't divorce our understanding of seclusion and restraint from this long-standing history of racial bias that has led to seclusion and restraint of Black and brown children and adults in multiple settings. In addition, there is an intersectionality between race and special education status. So that I think is what was being referred to earlier. In particular, we may over-identify Black students as emotionally disturbed because we may interpret their behaviors as threatening or as contrary to what our norms of the educational systems are. At the same time, we may under-identify Black and brown students as having learning disabilities, and we may fail to diagnose early and proactively academic problems that subsequently result in behavior problems when underlying academic deficiencies like challenges in terms of learning to read go unaddressed for years and years and years, and students essentially feel like they're being warehoused in an educational system that's not meeting their needs. So in terms of specifically the rules and regulations, one critical component with respect to training is to make sure that any training is done is tied to the need for cultural responsiveness and the identification of implicit bias in school discipline practices, including the use of seclusion and restraint. Because if we continue to use these practices and not recognize some of the biases that are going into the use of these practices, we'll continue to see these types of disproportionalities continue. In addition, what the literature is really clear on is that anytime there's subjectivity in decision making, such that judgment calls that are difficult and discretionary are left to the discretion of educators, that's where bias may intrude. And so it's important to have clear and objective criteria so that educators are really called to task for objective decisions and limiting the use of bias. And to really train educators on the interlinkages between race, special education, and the need for kind of both culturally responsive practices and restorative practices that aim on building on empathy and relationship building. Because one of the evidence-based ways of reducing racial disproportionality and discipline has simply been going back to empathy, doing simple trainings with educators so that they understand what may be driving these behaviors that are being exhibited and can respond more appropriately and proactively from a relationship-oriented way that results in de-escalation. Thank you.
That was incredibly valuable. I'm very glad you took the initiative to step up to the table. Thank you. Representative Gon-Gershowitz, I believe you had a statement.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to recognize my constituent, Vanessa, for her courage in being here today. We have spoken before, and I know that tragically you have become an expert in the gaps in our system and the failings in our system because you've lived them. I know what an incredible advocate you have been for your daughter and for children like her. You moved from the Chicago public school system after becoming an expert in gaps there in meeting the needs of your daughter, moved to our district, and I think that highlights one of the biggest issues with our system, which is that the resources available to children depend on where you live. So as the vice chair of the Mental Health Committee, I'm not going to repeat what Representative Conroy has said, except to say that I agree wholeheartedly with the sentiments behind everything you have said, everything Representative Conroy has said about our commitment in the Mental Health Committee and in the General Assembly to getting this right. I know this is going to be a comprehensive, I hope, the beginning of a much larger conversation about how we do a better job protecting all of our children. And I just want to thank you, Vanessa, for being here and for your consistent advocacy. This is not the first time that you stepped up to try and make a difference, and I just want to thank you. And I hope that we'll see you in Springfield to talk a little bit more as we move forward with legislation and how we can do a better job addressing gaps and supporting not just children, but the parents who are dealing with a system that often is failing. So thank you.
Thank you. And I believe Representative Carroll do you have a question? Do you want to ask it now, or do you want to wait until after our last speaker speaks?
First of all, thank you very much for your kind words you said before. So I think what you have hit upon is something that I see in my work away from the legislature as a coach and advocate for people with special needs, is creating conflict to avoid conflict. So a lot of the clients that I work with, a lot of kids that I see in school, will use things like being put in isolation. Will use behaviors that get away from what the real challenges are. And I think that helping those children identify what the triggers are to cause them to do that is the beginning process of all this. That's the toughest part of all this, is to say, when you're having a reaction, when you're having an outburst, when something is happening for you, that you have to look at that part of the process and say, why is the child doing what the child is doing? So, and us adults do it too. Trust me, I get it at home as well. So that's the first part of it. And I want to kind of come back to, again, thank you for what you said to me before. I know what your daughter feels like at times, because again, as I mentioned when I first sat down, when we first started, that I've been through those kinds of things. I know what it's like, and when we don't have empathy for the child that's going through the process, and we don't have respect for that child, and we don't treat the child with dignity, those things affect us the rest of our lives. And as you advocate for your daughter, and you do so eloquently, and we appreciate that, I think that's what we all have to keep in mind on the committee, is it's not just us fixing this problem. It's us giving these kids dignity. It's us giving these kids respect. It's us hearing what these kids are saying. And we have failed to do that for so many years, because for a long time, let's put them in the back of the classroom, put them in the principal's office, and lock them away. I know, because I was that kid. I mean, I don't want to keep beating the point up, but it's sort of what I dealt with. And now it's like with these kids too, it's like we're reinforcing the fact that they're different by putting them in different situations, and we've got to stop doing that. We have to help them assimilate. So your advocacy, the comments that you guys are making, what we're trying to get to, I think has really it's come out through this. And again, I appreciate your courage to sit here and speak. I know it's hard. Trust me, I know there's a lot of people here, there's cameras, but you did it so eloquently. So we owe it to your daughter. We owe it to parents like you. We owe it to the kids that have not had that, to make sure that we do it right. So thank you for standing up and fighting. And if you're in Representative Gon Gershwitz's district, you're near mine. So I guess I'll consider you one of mine too. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'd like to move on to our last speaker. State your name for the record.
Joey Magyar. Okay. I wasn't anticipating having an opportunity to speak here, so if you could forgive me if I'm a little bit rusty on what I'm saying. I have some written comments. I was wondering if I could have them added to the record, if that would be possible.
Yes.
But I want to start by speaking to you as a former student of the Illinois education system. I'm sorry, it's hard. I have experienced the use of restraint in a school environment. When I was a student, I was placed in a special education school. The first school I went to, it wasn't working out, so I was placed in another school. And I remember the first day there, I didn't know anyone, and I felt so overwhelmed. And I remember in the morning, I lied on the ground and cried, because I didn't know what to do, and there was so much stimuli. And in that moment, I just wanted to block everything out. And I remember they told me to stand up, and I refused. And so then they forcibly stood me up, and I then went and lied back down, and they repeated that. And then at that point, I had, the owner of the school and another staff member hold me to the wall. Would I be able to demonstrate? I want to show how I was held. I want to make sure it's clear. Is that acceptable?
Certainly.
And, I was being held there, and they wanted me to stand, and I refused to stand. And so I lifted my legs off the ground, and they held me by my arms. And I remember, what really sticks with me, so I wasn't following orders and they were holding me against the wall. And, as this went on, and the owner of the school, who very much led this, it really sticks with me the way that he mocked me and, made fun of me and laughed about it to, his staff. And then, would go from that, and then 2 seconds later go to just shouting at me. And, as a student who was new to this school and knew no one there, that was really overwhelming and hard, and I was crying the whole time. And I remember they had, eventually they got tired, and they had another 2 staff member, and they would alternate, who was holding me against the wall there, suspended, because they couldn't, stand, holding me up. And, as a student suspended by my arms and hanging there, in pain, I was losing feeling in my arms. And I remember the incident report from the incident says that I was held there for 45 minutes. I don't know, there's inaccuracies in the report, so I don't know if that's accurate. I'll say it felt like a long time. And I remember I made a comment at one point, because of the way I was held. I made it as, me trying to fight back. I made a comment that most victims of crucifixion die from asphyxiation, which I have asthma, and I was, it affected my breathing, but I wasn't, in any, to my knowledge, any danger of suffocating at that time. But I remember then later he turned to the staff and said, watch, he's going to tell us he's Jesus. Like, my plea to him was just an opportunity to make fun of me and say I had some sort of savior complex. And I remember after that day going home and, not knowing who to talk to, and going back to school the next day. And I remember that morning I wasn't doing work, and I don't expect you to understand why I wouldn't listen. I think there's a number of factors, but I remember they left me there outside and told me I had better think about whether I'm going to do my work, and the implication was clear what would happen if I didn't. And I remember sitting there, and I was outside, and to my knowledge, no one was watching me. And I just remember wanting to run and just wanting to leave and, get away from it all. But I knew that I couldn't, because then I would just be a student who ran away from school, and it would be my fault. And then they would, get me in more trouble or that kind of thing. And so I just waited there knowing what was coming for me. And so, the second day I had a similar experience. This time I was held against the wall on my knees. And I just, I was in so much distress. And, to have, 4 people there at all times. And then the second time they had someone there who was watching. I don't know what her role was. She never participated in the restraint. But I think, even now, when I think back, I think that's the most amount of people I've had giving me attention in school for that amount of time that I've ever had. And that was the circumstances under which that was happening. And, after the second day, I had a conversation with my therapist, and then we my parents removed me from the school at that time. And I reported this to my district, and I was removed from that school at the time, so I was out of school for a while, and then I was placed in another special education school. But to my knowledge, no further action was taken by the district. As far as I'm aware, they still send students to that school, and that school still receives public funding. And, since then, I've tried, talking to lawyers. If I heard back, I was told, for some reason they weren't able to help me. I remember I called DCFS to make a report at one point. I called the Board of Education once to make a report. And I remember the person on the phone told me that I could make a report, but that ISB didn't investigate schools, and that basically there would be no investigation and no follow-up. And I don't know if that's accurate. I've since heard other things, but I just want you to imagine how that feels as a student, who has to, call someone and say, I was abused, and to have them say, we're not even going to follow up. What that says to me is like, we don't care.
Excuse me.
Okay.
So sorry for your experience. Senator Lightfoot speaking. I think there's members that are wrapping up that need to leave now because we were supposed to be done at 1. We're all, I'm sure, just so sorry that you had this experience. You do have a written testimony that we'd love to have so that our staff can make copies for all of us and for the record. So is there any way you can bring your remarks to a close so that we can?
I'm sorry.
No, thank you so much.
I thought it was important.
And we're very sorry.
I wanted you to hear it, from a student's perspective.
Absolutely.
How that feels. I thought that was important to include.
And I would love to just talk to you at the end on the side to see whatever I can do to help you out as well.
Okay, thank you.
Because I've got some questions for you.
Yeah, all right,
Okay.
thank you. And, there's a lot of information that I've left out too that I'd be happy to, talk about afterwards.
Okay. Thank you. So if you could just wrap up your remarks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to stress, the limited resources that, many students have, in times of crisis. You want to talk to someone you trust, like a teacher or a social worker, but how can you do that if those people work for the school where, you were abused? And so, we need to, I think, first and foremost, we need to listen to people. And I think that's, one of those things that's hard to legislate. But I think that we can take steps in that direction. And, the final point I want to bring up is that, I know many students, are enrolled in private schools in the state of Illinois. And I know that a lot of what we've been talking to doesn't necessarily apply to private schools, especially with regards to the Board of Education's requirement. And my understanding is that the rules are much more lenient with private schools that don't receive public funds than they are with public schools. It's my understanding that corporal punishment is still allowed in private schools in the state of Illinois. And I think it's important as we ask these questions to make sure that we consider those students who are in the private schools, that if we're putting up these systems to protect students, that all students in the state of Illinois, are protected from abuse. Thank you.
So thank you for sharing such a very personal story. I do think that it is important at all times that we recognize as we're dealing with this what it feels like to experience discipline as a student in crisis, as well as what it feels like to be the professional who is attempting to manage the situation. There are a lot of parameters we need to evaluate. So that you were willing to bring that forward is really helpful. I know that you will be a partner as we continue to figure out best practices. I do want to check and see if ISB would like an opportunity to make a statement since they were referenced, just to provide any clarity. And if you will bring up your written testimony afterwards, we'll make sure that's included as part of the record. Thank you.
As ISB is approaching, if Senator Gillespie could speak, please.
Yes, I too want to thank you for your courage in coming forward with that testimony. What happened to you was just wrong. It was just wrong. What we heard from the woman speaking about her daughter and what we heard from you, this is the needle we have to thread in doing this legislation. We need to have the resources available to support the needs of our students who need these kinds of supports, to support the educators, and yet make sure that no abuses like what we just heard take place. So I really look forward to the stakeholders in this process working with you to find the solutions here, leaving any defensiveness at the door when we come into the rooms to talk about this. We just need to find the solution. Thank you.
Yes, and I absolutely want to appreciate, I don't know where he went, coming forward and sharing your story. I know it's very powerful to hear from you, and I know that took a lot of courage. I know that we appreciate hearing from individuals that experience these issues, and Dr. Ayala at the November board meeting encouraged anyone who has experienced these issues to contact State Board of Education staff so we could initiate investigations. We did initiate an investigation and issue corrective action in that situation, and are able to do so when we learn of issues like that. And hopefully with the new procedures that are in place, we will not get to that situation in the future, but we do have the ability to investigate, issue corrective action for individuals and school districts. So we are glad that we have those in place and happy to work with legislators and stakeholders and individuals moving forward.
Okay. Thank you all, both the people who gave testimony, who stayed in the room to hear, and for all of the legislators who participated today. We have a lot of work ahead of us.